Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to share about case study, which is a type of qualitative approach. So what is a case study? So when you say a case study is usually intended to explore something that is in depth, that has many facets or many phases, many elements, many aspects to understand the complex issue of that happens in a real life context. So when you're doing a survey on an experiment, you are very focused on a certain variable. You already predefine what you want to study. But when you're talking about case study, it is the nature of exploring deeper and in depth about an event or an issue, and that is done in a naturalistic setting, in a real setting. Okay, that is why case studies are sometimes referred as naturalistic design. Okay, you go and explore about a certain issues on its own setting, on its own environment. In experiments, we control the environment because we do not want the environment to intervene in our experiment that we are doing. Same goes to survey. You've already selected your sample. You just conduct at the very specific instrument that you have selected. You ask only very specified questions. So everything is like very restricted. But in a case study, you are opening up all the potential answers. All the answers, you are open. You are asking very in-depth questions to really explore an issue. Okay. So what is a case study used for? You used to explain, describe, or explore events, phenomenon in everyday context which they occur. Okay, so for example, how the questions are: how does an exam or how a certain thing is being implemented? What happened? So why this strategy is better than the other? So it is always open-ended questions. Okay, because you are not sure. You see, in qualitative is a very systematic inquiry, but it is you are not sure what information that you will retrieve from that particular study, meaning that you will have an idea. Okay, this is what I want to investigate, but when you go deeper and deeper, you will tend to get more information, more new information, or more variables that you might not plan ahead. Okay. So there are three main types of case studies. First we call intrinsic, second is instrumental, and third is collective. So intrinsic is if a researcher wants to study a phenomenon that is totally unique, and the researcher need to define what is the uniqueness of the case that they are studying. So I'm giving an example of investigating the implementation of lockdown at immigrant areas. Okay, if you've been following the news, there was a statement by Al Jazeera media saying that Malaysian government was biased towards the immigrants when they were under the lockdown. So this is a very unique case. So researcher wants to further explore because this is, where do they get the information from? Is it really true? So we would like to do a study, a case study, go and investigate at this lockdown places, interview these immigrants, okay, or observe these immigrants to identify what was actually happening. Okay, how do they actually implement it? How does these frontliners implemented the lockdown procedure? So you investigate the case. Okay, just like you are investigating a police case. Okay, so you are interested in one unique case. You go and explore further in depth to really understand what really happened. So this intrinsic is unique. The case has to be very, very unique. Okay, and the researcher is responsible in defining the uniqueness. Okay, so it is actually a little bit difficult to conduct because you as a researcher need to specify what is so unique about this case study. Okay, now the second type is instrumental. So what you use is you use a specific particular case to which may be better than others to get a broader understanding or appreciation of the phenomenon. Let's look at again the COVID-19 issue. Okay, so what you can do is you can conduct a case study investigating the implementation of lockdown during COVID-19. Okay, so maybe you want to investigate what is the procedure that they have been using. Like if you compare, if you, as I said again, if you've been following the news, um, there are countries that are still struggling even with the lockdown, that they are having issues in controlling this COVID-19. But how did Malaysia successfully um, curb this problem, or how do they actually address this problem, and how did our lockdown manage to reduce the cases to a single digit in the last few weeks? Okay, so this is a very good case study which we can help other countries to learn from our implementation. So you're studying a case. Okay, so what case? Implementation of lockdown. Where? Specifically in Malaysia. So with that information, we can have a broader appreciation or broader understanding what has been happening in Malaysia. So we have an idea. Okay, this is how it has been done. This is the procedure that they use when they say lockdown. How many hours are they allowed, how, all this, the SOPs that they have created, all this actually adds to the investigation. Clear? So this type of study is what we call instrumental. So we usually try to study these cases, this phenomenon, to understand deeper on the implementation or comparison of the application of certain procedures. So all these help us to learn better, to make sure that we can come up with the output that can be used by other people to identify where did they make mistakes. Okay, the third one is collective case studies. Collective is just similar to instrumental, but in collective what we are doing is we are studying multiple cases. In instrumental it's just a single case, but in collective we are studying multiple cases simultaneously or sequentially. We add more cases, and again to get a broader understanding. So previously in instrumental we studied the implementation of lockdowns in Malaysia. But in collective, what we can do is we can investigate the implementation of lockdown across West, East and Southeast Asia continents, for example. So maybe you want to focus on Southeast Asia countries. How did this implementation of lockdown was conducted? So this will actually give us information or more in-depth understanding about what is common across all these countries, or what did they do differently. So you have a really open-ended questions. How, what, why. So all these can be answered by examining multiple or different cases. So with different cases you can make comparisons, you can find similarities. But in instrumental you are just describing one particular situation, just one case. In collective you have multiple cases, so you can see what is the common thing that they have been applying. So it kind of gives us a broader understanding of the issue. So how case studies are conducted? Okay, the main step is you have to define the case. When you're defining the case, it includes formulated questions. You have to write proper research questions. So if you are using a type of intrinsic design, you have to specify the uniqueness in the case that you are investigating. So your research question should be, what are the procedures? Okay, how was the experience? So everything is open-ended. It is not like quantitative research questions. Is there a relationship? No, you are not looking into, you are not running any statistical analysis there. You are just exploring, describing. So the questions need to be reflecting on those terms. And then you have to specify the boundary which clarifies the nature and time period. Okay, when you're talking about a case, you have to be very specific on what is your case about. You have to define, you have to give us an understanding what you're trying to study. So in the previous example, previous slide, we use the situation of COVID-19 lockdown. Okay, so you have to tell us the nature. So we are studying the lockdown during COVID, and during which period? Maybe on the first phase. So from March till June. So what is your time period? Because these cases are time specific, right? Now we don't have lockdown anymore. So we have to really define the time period. You have to draw out, because it is going to be a huge study if you want to talk about lockdown, but you need to specify during which time of this lockdown that you want to study. Okay, so you have to be very precise on that. You have to give us an understanding of the nature, what you want to study, and what is the time period. You have to draw a boundary, because in case studies, in qualitative studies, you have a tendency to explore and explore and explore until it becomes a huge project. So you cannot manage a huge one. So you have to be very focused. Okay. Next is you have to select the case. Here you need to identify what type of design that you want to use. Is it going to be intrinsic, instrumental, or collective? Okay, so you need to tally your type of case design with your objectives, with your research questions, because every research question for every design will be different. Okay. Third one is collecting and analyzing the data. So in qualitative studies, we usually don't rely on only single source of data. Like in survey, we only send out the questionnaire, we get the information. In experiments, we again give the treatment and then we observe the outcome. Okay, the outcome can be measured using instrument or maybe through your own observations. But in qualitative data, in qualitative studies, we try to collect as variety of source of data, multiple sources of data, so that it gives us a better understanding of solid evidences to the interpretation. Okay, so sometimes we use survey, we use interviews, we use focus groups, we use document analysis. So what do we mean by interviews and focus group? So in the previous example, using the COVID-19 lockdown, so you can conduct a survey with the frontliners on how did they implement it. So you can interview the immigrant workers. Okay, so if you don't want to do one-to-one interviews, maybe you can have a focus group, a group of immigrants, and then you conduct asking question in a group. Another thing is you can also analyze the documents that has been produced by the ministry or the government, okay, in handling the implementation. So you can actually do some analysis on the procedures. So if you notice, the government clearly released as standard operating procedures during the lockdown. So you can also cross-check those information with what the results from the interviewer and also from the survey. Correct? So that is what we mean by multiple sources of data. And all these multiple sources of data need to be triangulated. Okay? Need to be analyzed in order to get the overall idea. So these different sources of data help us to establish the term what we call as triangulation. Triangulation is a type of internal validity, okay, to the extent to which the method is appropriate to answer the research question. Meaning, we have multiple sources of data. So all these data helps us, different sources, different people. So when we say different sources, we get information from the frontliners, we get information from the immigrant, and we get information from the ministry. So all these different sources of data should end of the day tell us the same story, okay, about implementation. So if they can cross check the information from the document to what the survey has been telling, and also from the interviews with the immigrants, it kind of like gives us more validity to our findings, more confidence to our findings that what we got is actually correct, because we got different sources of information confirming this data. That is what we call internal validity. So if everybody is, so your information from the document is the same with the survey findings, the same with the immigrant responses, meaning that you have high internal validity because all of them are telling the same story. So there is a consistency, and that is what actually happens. So what information or final findings that you get from all different sources of data is actually assuring that you got the right information. Okay, so that is what we mean by we got information from different sources, from different angles on the same issue to get a overall or holistic picture. Okay, ideally different sources of data on the same issue should lead to the same conclusion. So that is why we are trying to get more people, okay, more variety of information. So when there is a variety of source of information confirming this findings, it kind of adds value to your study. It gives people confidence that, oh yeah, that is true, because you are getting different sources. Just like the case that is being ongoing on the news regarding the immigrants who are not treated well during lockdown. So who did they get the information from? Is it only from the immigrants? Did they interview frontliners? Did they interview the Malaysian who lives along with the immigrants? So when the source of data is only from one source, like from just say that from immigrant alone, it makes us query, okay, so you are making judgment based on only one source of information. So that could be wrong. That could be biased, misleading of the real situation. So that's why we suggest to get more information, more variety of sources of data to explain the situation. Finally, you need to interpret. So remember, we are getting sources of data from various variety of sources. Like we are getting interview data, we are getting survey data, we are getting document analysis data. So all these are rich, and it is in terms of volume is huge. So the research analysis, the interpretation or identifying the information from this big voluminous data is the integral process of the analysis. So from the rich data, we have to find what is the significant information that we found to answer our research question. Okay, so the data need to be organized to allow the key issues to be identified. So you have to imagine if you interviewed 10 people, and then you have to transcribe all the interviews, then you have to process all the interviews to find what is the key issues that we found, and that is from one source of data. Then you have to run the survey data, and then you have to run on the document analysis. So what is the information that you got? So all these need to be combined into a single findings, and then you have to interpret it by answering the research question. So it is actually a very long process, because when they say case study, it looks very simple because people always go for case study thinking that they don't have to run a statistics analysis. The most people do for case studies, when they conduct a survey, they just report percentages, descriptive analysis. They do not run any hypothesis testing, so they don't have to run any statistical analysis. But the case study, although it looks easy, but is very, very tedious, and it is very, very time consuming, because you really have to look at the data multiple times. Because when you read it, maybe for the first time, you think this is what they meant. Okay, maybe you say, okay, the issue, the implementation, the SOP was the main point from the document, and then you found that frontliners were also talking about SOP, and the immigrant was also talking about SOP. So you found that the implementation of COVID-19 successfulness is because of the clear SOP. But when you review back again, maybe you found a different element to it. Maybe it's not just the SOP, but it could be the officers implementing it, or the support that they got from the public. Because if you notice, when during the lockdown, although they are immigrant, all the NGOs, the government was providing these people with food, and they got the meals for free for 3 days, free medical checkups. So what made it successful? Maybe because of the cooperation of these immigrants. Okay, so maybe that is a new theme that you found. Not really the SOP, but the cooperation, the motivation. And you can also see the frontliners' motivation to overcome this issue, and the government's commitment. You see how much government has been supporting the immigrants in getting the food. They are giving food for them for free. There are a lot of NGOs. So you see, there is a new support system that has been built to help curb this pandemic. So this is, again, when you read again, there might be different interpretation of meaning. So you have to repeat the data analysis step multiple times. You have to review again, and again. And you have to sometimes cross-check with other people who are experienced in the field to determine whether your finding is making sense, or is it applicable, or is it justifiable. Okay, so how to analyze these data will be discussed in data analysis topic. Okay, so what is the potential problems of conducting a case study? Case study, it is very specific to the very specific. So it is done case by case basis. So if we cannot generalize the findings to other settings. So we cannot use the findings that we got on the COVID-19 lockdown for immigrant in the other countries or other contexts, or lockdown in Malaysian population. So you cannot use the findings from the immigrant population to infer or to make conclusions about Malaysian population's lockdown, because it is totally different. Okay, so that is the step back, because in survey what we do is we try to get most representative sample so that we can generalize the findings to the larger population. So we take the sample, and then from the sample we make generalization. We use the small sample to infer or to make conclusions about the bigger population. But in case studies, you're just taking one sample and your interpretation is within that particular context, within that particular case. So you cannot use the findings to infer about other cases. Okay, so that is a drawback. You cannot, it's the finding is not transferable, okay, to the other settings, other conditions. So how can we avoid these problems? So use theoretical sampling. So identify your samplings carefully. Make sure that the sample that we are using is appropriate. So what type of sampling are you using? Are you using purposive? Then it only can be generalized to that particular population, not to other populations. So you have to be very, very careful on all those things. Second is respondent validation. So when we say that it is not rigorous, okay, the case studies mostly the interpretations are based on you. Okay, so sometimes you interpret the data, your findings, but is that really true representing the case that is happening? Because you are not part of the case, you are just like an observer of this case, and you just explain it or from the data that you get. But what you can do is you can check if your findings is what the people in that case involved in this case is actually experiencing. So what you can do is you can check with the participant whether okay, this is what my finding is it something that does it make sense, does it really explain your situation, does it explain the case? Okay, so that is what we mean by participant checking. That is, you have to be very transparent when you're conducting qualitative study in general, because a lot of time is you are the experimenter. So there is a lot of tendency for you to become biased. Okay, so maybe your patriotism to the country. Okay, so that could be if you did not manage it well, you tend to be biased towards the immigrants, for example. Or maybe you might be in favor of immigrants, so you are highlighting the story bigger for the immigrant compared to the real situation. So you have to be very transparent. So how you did it, what did you do, so people will have more confidence in your findings. Okay, second is bias in case selection and data collection reasons for choosing a particular design. So this can be also a problem when you are conducting a case study. Okay, so you have to be explicit, very, very, again, transparent on the researchers' involvement in the study, because whatever that you finally interpret or report is all based on your interpretation or understanding from the data that you collected. So you have to be very careful when you are reporting it. You should not be involving too much. You should not be probing people to answer in the way that you want the responses to be. And then you also have to make sure that the conclusions and the interpretations are met. So don't just leave it hanging. Okay, so if you want to talk about like multiple cases, so you have to make a conclusion. Okay, so what is actually happening? What is the similarity between the cases? So what is the main similarities that you found? So you have to explain those things. So in qualitative studies, sometimes the thesis can go up to 500 pages because they want to explain every detail that they got from the findings. Especially when you have multiple sources of data, you have really huge amount of information in terms of text. So all these need to be interpreted, need to be concluded. So always have to make sure that triangulations are being done, okay, in order to get idea that okay, all this information that we get is correct. So research readers who are reading it will have more confidence on the findings.